On a warm and seemingly ordinary summer night in June 1912, a small farming town in the state of Iowa prepared for sleep with the quiet confidence that nothing bad could happen where everyone knew each other. Houses were dark, streets were silent, and families believed that faith, routine, and familiarity were enough to protect them from harm. By the time the sun rose the next morning, 8 people would be dead, 6 of them children, and the name Villisca would become forever associated with fear, brutality, and unanswered questions. Welcome to Myth Vault, a channel dedicated to uncovering real mysteries, real crimes, and real stories that history never fully explained. In this documentary, we are presenting the complete and documented story of the Villisca Axe Murders, one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in the history of the United States. This is not a legend, not folklore, and not a ghost story, but a real crime supported by police records, witness testimony, court proceedings, and historical investigation. In this video, you will learn who the Moore family truly was, why they were trusted and respected by their community, and how an ordinary Sunday night turned into a nightmare that still haunts investigators more than a century later. We will walk through the final hours of the family, the shocking discovery of the crime, the disturbing details found inside the house, and the mistakes that destroyed the investigation before it truly began. You will hear about the suspects whose names were dragged through newspapers, courtrooms, and public opinion, and why none of them were ever convicted. From a traveling minister with a deeply troubling past, to powerful local figures with possible motives, to the terrifying theory of a serial killer who moved across the country by train, every explanation leads deeper into mystery rather than closure. This story matters because behind every headline were real parents and real children who never had a chance to grow old. If you believe real victims deserve real truth and careful storytelling, subscribe to Myth Vault now, because this channel exists to preserve memory, expose unanswered history, and challenge what we think we know. Stay with us, because once this story begins, it will not let go. In the early 1900s, Villisca, Iowa was the definition of a peaceful rural town, built on farming, church life, and neighborly trust. Crime was rare, and when it did occur, it was usually limited to small disputes or minor thefts that were quickly resolved. People believed safety came from familiarity, and strangers were noticed immediately. Josiah Moore was one of the town's most respected residents, a 43-year-old businessman who owned a successful hardware and agricultural implement store. His store supplied tools, farming equipment, and household necessities to many families in the surrounding area, making him both well-known and financially comfortable. Josiah was seen as dependable, hardworking, and fair in his dealings, earning trust from customers and competitors alike. His wife, Sarah Moore, 39 years old, was deeply involved in the Presbyterian Church and was especially committed to organizing events for children. She was known as kind, attentive, and structured, a woman who valued routine and responsibility. Together, they raised 4 children who reflected the values of their household. Herman Montgomery Moore was 11 and often helped with chores. Mary Catherine Moore was 10, and known for her confidence and friendliness. Arthur Boyd Moore was 7 and energetic, and Paul Vernon Moore was only 5 and full of innocence. The Moore home represented stability, order, and warmth, the kind of place where parents felt safe letting their children visit. On Sunday, June 9, 1912, the Moore family attended the Presbyterian Church as they often did. That evening was special because the church was hosting a Children's Day program, an event that involved music, readings, and performances by local children. Sarah Moore had played a major role in organizing the event, and many families attended to support their children and neighbors. After the program ended at approximately 9:30 in the evening, the Moore family prepared to return home. Mary Catherine Moore invited 2 friends, Ina Mae Stillinger, who was 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, who was 11, to spend the night. The Stillinger sisters were well known to the Moores, and their parents agreed without hesitation, trusting the Moore household completely. The families walked together through the quiet streets of Villisca, talking casually and enjoying the mild summer night. They arrived at the Moore house between 9:45 and 10 in the evening. Inside, the children prepared for bed, while the parents settled into their nightly routine. Lights were turned off, doors were closed, and the house grew silent. There were no signs of fear, no strange noises, and no indication that anything was wrong. What no one realized was that this sense of safety may have been false and that someone could have been watching the house for hours. Later investigators would suggest that the killer entered the house earlier in the evening and hid in the attic, waiting patiently in the darkness. This idea would be supported by cigarette remains later reported in the attic, suggesting prolonged waiting rather than sudden intrusion. Sometime after midnight, the calm that defined Villisca ended violently, and the trust that held the town together was shattered forever. Medical examination later estimated that the murders occurred sometime between midnight and the early morning hours of June 10, 1912. The killer began upstairs in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Using an axe that belonged to Josiah himself, the attacker struck with immense force. Josiah Moore received repeated blows to the head, so severe that his facial features were destroyed and his eyes were completely obliterated. The ceiling above the bed showed a deep gouge mark where the axe struck as it was raised for another blow. Sarah Moore was attacked next, with the sharp blade of the axe used instead of the blunt end, a detail that suggested intention rather than random violence. After killing the parents, the murderer moved through the house in a calm and deliberate manner. Each of the Moore children was attacked in their beds while sleeping. The blunt end of the axe was used on the children, and there was no sign of struggle, indicating they were either unconscious or killed instantly. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul never had the chance to wake or understand what was happening. After killing the children, the attacker returned to the parents' bedroom and struck them again. This second attack knocked over a shoe that filled with blood, a horrifying detail noted by investigators. The murderer then moved downstairs to the guest bedroom, where Ina Mae Stillinger and Lena Gertrude Stillinger were sleeping. Both girls were struck in their beds, but Lena showed signs of awareness. She had a defensive wound on her arm, and her body was found lying crosswise on the bed rather than neatly positioned. Her body had been moved and her clothing disturbed, leading early investigators to suspect a sexual motive. Later examination found no physical evidence of sexual assault, but the positioning added another disturbing layer to the crime. After the murders, the killer did not flee immediately. A slab of bacon was taken from the icebox and placed near the axe. Food on the kitchen table remained untouched, and a basin of bloody water was found nearby. Every mirror in the house was covered with clothing, including garments removed from dressers. This act suggested superstition, ritual behavior, or psychological disturbance. A gas lamp upstairs had its chimney removed and wick turned low, possibly to provide faint light without drawing attention. The murderer then left the house silently, disappearing into the darkness without waking a single neighbor. By morning, the Moore house stood quiet, holding a secret that would soon horrify the entire nation. The morning of June 10, 1912 arrived quietly in Villisca, Iowa. With no warning that the town was about to experience the darkest day in its history, farmers expected to see their neighbors outside early, families expected children to prepare for school and chores, and life was supposed to continue as it always had. When the Moore family did not appear outside that morning, it immediately felt strange to those who knew their routines. Mary Peckham, who lived nearby, noticed that the house was silent and that no one had come out to begin daily work. She waited for some time, hoping the family was simply running late, but the silence continued. Concerned, she walked toward the Moore house and knocked on the front door. There was no response. She knocked again, louder this time, and still heard nothing from inside. When she tried the door handle, she discovered it was locked, which was unusual for that hour of the day. Unsure of what else to do, she let the Moore family chickens out of their enclosure, believing that if something was wrong, at least the animals should not suffer. Mary Peckham then contacted Ross Moore, the brother of Josiah Moore, who lived nearby and owned a copy of the house key. Ross Moore arrived shortly afterward, already sensing that something was not right. He knocked firmly on the door and called out for his brother and sister-in-law. There was no answer. With growing fear, Ross Moore unlocked the front door and stepped inside while Mary Peckham waited outside on the porch. The house was quiet, almost unnaturally so, and the air felt heavy. Ross Moore walked into the parlor and then toward the downstairs guest bedroom. When he opened the door, he was confronted with a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Ina Mae Stillinger and Lena Gertrude Stillinger lay on the bed, their bodies still, their heads brutally crushed. Blood stained the bedding and walls, and there was no sign of life. Ross Moore immediately ran from the house, pale and shaking, and told Mary Peckham to contact Henry Hank Horton, Villisca's primary peace officer. Horton arrived quickly and entered the house to investigate. As he moved from room to room, the full scope of the massacre became clear. Josiah Moore and Sarah Moore were found dead in their upstairs bedroom, their injuries severe beyond comprehension. The 4 more children were discovered in their beds, each having suffered fatal blows to the head. An axe belonging to Josiah Moore was found in the guest bedroom near the bodies of the Stillinger sisters. The violence was overwhelming, and the silence of the house made it even more disturbing. Doctors later estimated that the murders occurred between midnight and the early morning hours of June 10th. As news spread through Villisca, disbelief turned into panic and fear. At approximately 8:40 in the morning, the town's central telephone office issued a general alert, informing households that a terrible crime had occurred. Almost immediately, people rushed toward the Moore house. Men, women, and even children crowded into the home, driven by shock, curiosity, and fear. No barriers were placed, and no one was stopped from entering. People walked through rooms, stepped in blood, touched furniture, and examined bodies. Some individuals handled the axe, passing it from hand to hand without understanding the importance of preserving evidence. Others removed pieces of the scene as souvenirs, including fragments of Josiah Moore's skull. The crime scene was destroyed within hours of its discovery. The sheriff attempted to control the crowd, but lacked the authority and resources to stop them. By the time the National Guard was contacted, the damage had already been done. Dr. Lindquist, the county coroner, arrived around 9 in the morning and was horrified by what he saw. He expressed anger at the lack of control and demanded immediate action to secure the area. Despite his objections, the bodies were not removed from the house until late that night. The fire station was converted into a temporary morgue, and it was nearly 2 in the morning before all 8 bodies were transported there. Nearly a full day had passed since the murders occurred. Any chance of preserving critical evidence was gone forever. The investigation had been compromised beyond repair, and Villisca would never receive the answers it desperately needed. With the crime scene destroyed and emotions running high, investigators faced an impossible task. Doctors confirmed that all victims died from severe head trauma, but the exact sequence of events remained unclear. One of the most troubling questions was how the killer moved through a small wooden farmhouse without waking anyone. The floors were known to creak, and the rooms were close together. Newspapers quickly began offering theories to fill the gaps left by the lack of evidence. One popular theory suggested that the family had been drugged with sedatives placed in milk or food before the attack. At the time, toxicology testing was not a standard part of medical examinations, so this theory could not be proven or disproven. Investigators found signs that suggested the killer may have waited inside the house for hours. Reports mentioned spent cigarettes found in the attic, indicating that someone hid there while the family attended church and later fell asleep. An imprint was discovered in the hay inside the barn near a knothole, suggesting that someone may have watched the house from outside before entering. Upstairs, a gas lamp was found with its glass chimney removed and its wick turned down low, possibly used to provide faint light without drawing attention. Downstairs, investigators found a fragment of a keychain that did not belong to any member of the Moore family. Despite these findings, none of the evidence pointed clearly to a single suspect. An inquest was held on June 11, 1912, during which 13 individuals were questioned as witnesses. Most were neighbors, townspeople, or individuals who had passed through Villisca around the time of the murders. Without physical evidence, suspicion began to fall on behavior rather than facts. Every stranger became a potential killer. Every traveler was watched with fear. One individual, Andrew Sawyer, drew particular attention due to his obsession with the murders. He reportedly slept fully, clothed as if prepared to flee, and kept an axe beside his bed. Despite this disturbing behavior, no evidence linked him to the crime, and he was never charged. Public fear continued to grow, fueled by sensational newspaper headlines and rumors. Journalists published dramatic stories that often blurred fact and speculation. Outside law enforcement agencies attempted to assist, but coordination was poor and methods were outdated. Instead of building a solid case, investigators responded to pressure from the public and the media. The town demanded justice, and officials felt forced to produce results. This desperation led to rushed accusations and unreliable confessions. Men were arrested, interrogated, and tried, only to be released when evidence failed to support the claims. Each failure deepened the frustration and fear within the community. The investigation became less about finding the truth and more about calming public outrage. As years passed, the murders remained unsolved, and the sense of safety in Villisca was permanently destroyed. Families locked their doors, strangers were no longer trusted, and the town carried a collective trauma that never fully healed. The failure of the investigation ensured that the identity of the killer would remain unknown, turning the Villisca Axe Murders into one of the most haunting unanswered questions in American history. As the investigation stalled and fear spread across Villisca and surrounding towns, attention shifted from evidence to individuals who seemed different, unstable, or inconvenient. With no clear forensic trail, investigators and the public began searching for someone whose past or behavior could explain the unimaginable violence. One of the earliest patterns was the suspicion of transients, because at the time, traveling workers and strangers were often viewed with fear and mistrust. Every man who passed through town by train or wagon became a possible suspect in the minds of frightened residents. Among those questioned was a man named Andrew Sawyer, who quickly drew attention due to his strange behavior after the murders. Sawyer reportedly became obsessed with the crime, speaking about it constantly and sleeping fully clothed, as if prepared to flee at any moment. He also kept an axe beside his bed, which deeply disturbed those who knew about it. Despite this unsettling behavior, no physical evidence connected him to the Moore house, and he was eventually dismissed as a suspect. As fear intensified, suspicion turned toward individuals with more visible connections to the events of that night. One of the most famous suspects in the case was Reverend George Kelly, an English-born traveling minister who had been in Villisca at the time of the murders. Kelly had arrived in town on June 8, 1912 to participate in the Children's Day activities at the Presbyterian Church. He left Villisca early in the morning on June 10th, only hours before the bodies were discovered. Kelly was known to have a history of mental illness and disturbing behavior dating back to his youth. As an adult, he had been accused of peeping into windows and asking young women and girls to pose nude for him. After the murders, Kelly developed an intense fascination with the case and began writing letters to police, investigators, and even the families of the victims. His letters included disturbing details that raised suspicions about how much he truly knew. A private investigator responded to one of Kelly's letters, asking him to explain how he knew certain details of the crime. Kelly replied with a detailed account, claiming he heard sounds during the night and may have witnessed the murders. Authorities were unsure whether this knowledge came from guilt or from imagination fueled by mental illness. Kelly was later arrested and tried twice for the murders. The first trial ended with a hung jury, and the second trial ended in an acquittal. Despite a confession given during questioning, jurors did not believe his statements were reliable or truthful. Kelly would later be institutionalized after being convicted of sending obscene material through the mail, further complicating perceptions of his credibility. Another suspect was Frank Fernando Jones, a powerful businessman and Iowa state senator. Jones had previously employed Josiah Moore at his implement store before Moore left to open his own competing business. Rumors circulated that Moore's new business had taken customers and profits away from Jones. There were also unproven rumors of a personal scandal involving Jones's family, though no evidence supported these claims. Some believed Jones had both motive and influence, but no direct proof ever tied him to the murders. One of the most chilling theories involved a man named William Mansfield, a former soldier and known criminal with a violent past. Mansfield was suspected of committing multiple axe murders across several states in a similar manner. Investigators noted striking similarities between the Villisca murders and killings in Colorado Springs, Ellsworth, Kansas, and Paola, Kansas. In each case, families were murdered in their sleep with an axe, mirrors were covered, and lamps were manipulated to produce low light. Sheets or clothing were used to cover windows, and basins of water were found where the killer appeared to wash afterward. A private detective named James Newton Wilkerson believed Mansfield was a serial killer responsible for many of these crimes. Wilkerson claimed Mansfield wore gloves during attacks because his fingerprints were on record from a military prison. In 1916, Mansfield was arrested and brought to Iowa for questioning. Payroll records placed him in another state at the time of the Villisca murders, and he was released due to lack of evidence. Mansfield later sued Wilkerson and won compensation, further damaging the case. Despite this, eyewitness testimony suggested Mansfield may have been seen leaving Villisca the morning after the murders, casting doubt on his alibi. Another suspect was Henry Lee Moore, a known axe murderer who killed his own mother and grandmother months after the Villisca killings. The similarities in method raised strong suspicion, but no direct connection could be proven. In modern years, authors and researchers propose that the Villisca murders were part of a larger series committed by a serial killer named Paul Mueller. According to this theory, Mueller traveled by train and targeted families across the country over many years. The pattern of attacks, locations near rail lines, and consistent behavior supported the idea of a single roaming killer. Despite extensive research, Mueller was never captured, and his existence remains a theory rather than a proven fact. As decades passed, every suspect faded into uncertainty. No conviction was ever secured, no definitive answer was found, and the truth remained buried beneath failed investigations and lost evidence. The Villisca Axe murders became more than a crime. They became a symbol of how justice can disappear when fear, chaos, and poor decisions take control. More than a century has passed since the night the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters were murdered, yet the Villisca Axe murders refused to fade into history. The case did not end with an arrest, a conviction, or a clear answer. but instead became a permanent wound in the story of American crime. As years turned into decades, Villisca changed, but the memory of that night remained alive in whispers, cautionary tales, and unanswered questions. Families locked their doors more carefully. Parents watched their children more closely, and strangers were no longer welcomed without suspicion. The idea that such violence could occur in a town built on trust shattered a sense of security that never fully returned. The Moore house itself became a symbol of loss, fear, and mystery. For many years after the murders, the house stood as a reminder of the crime, avoided by some and stared at by others. In the 1990s, new owners purchased the home and made the decision to restore it to its original 1912 condition. Modern renovations were removed, original layouts were recreated, and the house was transformed into a historical site. Today, the Villisca Axe Murder House is open to the public for tours and overnight stays. Visitors walk through the same rooms where the family slept, where the murders occurred, and where investigators once stood confused and overwhelmed. Many visitors report strange sounds, unexplained movements, and feelings of unease, leading to claims that the house is haunted. Whether these experiences are psychological, emotional, or something unexplained, they highlight how deeply this story still affects those who encounter it. Yet the true horror of Villisca is not ghosts or legends, but the reality that 8 lives were taken, and no one was held accountable. The failure of the investigation serves as a lesson in how critical evidence preservation is and how public panic can destroy the truth. The contamination of the crime scene, the lack of forensic science, and the pressure to find someone to blame ensured that justice slipped away. Over time, theories continued to emerge, linking Villisca to other axe murders across the country. Some historians believe the crimes were part of a larger pattern, suggesting the existence of a roaming serial killer who exploited the limitations of early law enforcement. Others believe the answer was always closer, hidden behind power, influence, or fear of scandal. No matter the theory, the truth remains locked in the past, unreachable with certainty. What remains undeniable is that the victims deserve to be remembered not as part of a mystery, but as real people whose lives mattered. Josiah Moore, Sarah Moore, Herman Moore, Mary Catherine Moore, Arthur Moore, Paul Moore, Ina Mae Stillinger, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger were not symbols. They were a family and 2 children who trusted the world around them. Their story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, accountability, and how easily truth can be lost. This documentary is based on verified historical records and documented research, including archive reports from the Chicago Daily Tribune, published in June 1912, investigative articles from Smithsonian Magazine by Mike Dash, records from the Iowa Cold Cases Project, materials from the Villisca Axe Murder House Historical Archive, and the book The Man from the Train by Bill James and Rachel McCarthy James, all confirming that the Villisca Axe murders are a real and documented historical event. If you believe stories like this deserve more than silence, if you believe victims deserve to be remembered with truth and respect, and if you want deeply researched mysteries told with care and responsibility, then subscribe to Myth Vault now, because every subscription helps keep forgotten history alive, and every viewer becomes part of a community that refuses to let the truth disappear.